So, hi everyone, my name is Fidelity Chauke. I'm an Android developer at DVT, and yeah, this is my maiden tech talk. So yeah, wish me luck. And I had to say like tech talk slowly, so it doesn't sound like TikTok. I haven't done any TikToks either, but yeah, it's a tech talk, and I'm talking about Constraint Layout 2, the helpers that came with Constraint Layout 2. Specifically, I'll focus a bit more on flow. So why talk about flow? You know, it's like Constraint Layout 2 is like 2020, and you know all the attention is being given to things like Jetpack Compose, and rightly so. You know, Jetpack Compose and all these declarative UI toolkits are definitely the future. However, we don't live in the future, do we? Yeah, we live in the present. And fortunately, there are some improvements that are being made on the current UI toolkit. So Constraint Layout 2 actually introduced three things, three significant things. The flow, which I'll talk about a lot in this presentation. I'll also in passing mention a little bit about layer and motion layout. So yeah, very quickly, what was Constraint Layout 2 layer? It's actually a new helper. So if you remember from the original Constraint Layout, we had various helpers like guidelines and barriers. So with Constraint Layout 2, another helper was added called layer, which is actually a virtual layer where you can reference several views and apply the same transformation on those views at once. So like you can see the little animation I have there. You can, you know, translate your views and you can rotate them. And you do this without actually adding another layout inside your constraint layout, but the view hierarchy remains flat. Yeah, so you can also give it a try. There is the much talked about motion layout, which is also really, really cool. It allows us to build and preview animations and edit the animations using the motion editor. And yeah, it's something that is highly recommended to play around with as well when we get an opportunity. But in more detail, Constraint Layout Flow, what is it? Most importantly, I would like to mention that it is what is called a virtual layout. So Constraint Layout 2 came with this concept of virtual layouts where you can mimic the behavior of having another layout inside the parent layout, but without actually creating another layout. That's why it's virtual. And specifically, it helps to position the widgets on the screen. So I'll talk about this a lot more in the demo, but it basically works like magic, where you've got a bunch of unconstrained views, you add them into the flow, and this virtual layout will help to lay them out on the screen. And it does this without adding extra layers on the view hierarchy. I'll keep mentioning this over and over again. So why should we use it? As I alluded to earlier, it helps to position your widgets without adding individual constraints. I've noticed in certain projects, a lot of developers going back to using linear layouts over constraint layout for certain use cases, because with linear layouts, you only add the linear layout and then you just add views into the linear layout, and they are arranged magically. You don't have to worry about fiddling with constraints from each little element and making sure that it's constrained relative to something else. I'm sure if we're watching PJ making his login screen, although that was iOS, we noticed it was just a lot of effort to use constraints to lay out many small little views. So what Constraint Layout Flow does is you just add all of these views into the flow, and they are laid out automatically on the screen to form a list or to form a chain or even a table type of view. And another great thing about it is that you can also reference the views inside the constraint layout flow. You can still reference other views outside that flow to them. So for example, let's say you've got 6 elements in your flow, and there's something that you don't want to be part of the flow, but you want to position relatively to that element. It is still very possible because those elements aren't actually inside another layout. They're still members of the parent constraint layout. And I use it a lot because it's really, really versatile. I almost use it now on every layout that I make. So when can I use it? As I mentioned just before, the versatility is really great for me when you're making lists, and not like the type of recycler view lists, but the lists where you've got all the elements hard-coded and you just want to lay them out on your screen. You've got chains and you've got tables. And like the tables are really interesting because they behave like when you have an overflow of items in your chain, you can tell it to wrap onto the next line or onto the following lines, and also produce a table type of view or a table-like behavior. So yeah, how does it compare with the linear layout? So one thing I like about the linear layout, especially for those developers who still want to manually type their views in XML, the linear layout is still a bit more concise than using, sorry, I don't know why my animations are going by themselves. The linear layout is actually still more concise than the constraint layout flow because there's a little bit more setup that you have to do. I'll actually demo it very shortly. And also, besides that, it's also really useful. But if you're also looking at adding views in a sequential manner in an easy way, I think the linear layout and constraint layout measure up fairly equally. An advantage of the constraint layout over the linear layout is that it keeps a flat view hierarchy, and it's also really easy to edit so that you can try out different combinations, different spacings, and it's really easy to make tables and grids without using the gridded table view or grid layout. So yeah, I hope none of you have had to use those. They're really awful. And it's much better now to use the constraint layout flow. So I'm going to give a very short demo, and hopefully you'll be able to follow along. I don't anticipate having as many problems as as PJ did. But yeah, let's hope my IDE behaves. So naturally, there is some setup I did. Very simply, I just added a number of views, in this case, buttons, and they're not constrained. That's why they're all in the top right corner. I can quickly show XML. So it's simply just constraint layout with 10 buttons in it. So let me open the design view. If we want to add the flow inside this constraint layout, there are a number of ways you can do it. You can right-click and go to Add Helpers and select your flow, or there's this helpers section here, which has all of the layers I was talking about as well. But here is flow that we can add it in. So I'll drag and drop it in. I'm that guy who enjoys drag and drop. And you just simply constrain it to the parent. I'll just give 0 here, maybe 16 on the sides, and make the width to match the constraints. And now, very simply, I can select all of these views and drag and drop them into the flow. That's one way. Let me undo. Or I can actually add them in one by one in the specific order that I want to. But that's a bit tedious. So let me just go back and add all of them in. And come on. Yes, there we go. And you can actually see now that inside the flow, we've got these italicized references. These are reference IDs of the widgets or the views that are inside that flow. And as I mentioned earlier, you have a chain, but the chain is so long, it's overlapping on the sides. So let me just go to the flow. You find that you can play around with the orientation. Currently it's horizontal by default, but you can make it vertical to look like a linear layout. If we quickly go back to the horizontal, where it's overflowing from the sides, you can set a wrap mode where you can ask it to chain onto the next lines. It's already looking quite neat. Or you can have it aligned so that it behaves more like a table. So if it's chained, it behaves like individual chains where the items are spread out equally in your rows. And if you click on aligned, it behaves more like a table with a set number of rows and columns. Let me quickly go back to the vertical view so that we can actually put them in a better order. So ordering them, again, is very simple. It's drag and drop. I want us to make a calculator type of keypad. Come on, please behave. Okay. Sorry. Anyway, we can go to our XML and do that easily. So we want button to be at the first one, and then button 2, then button 3, I'm just keeping an eye on my time. I've got 5 minutes left, so I'll be done shortly. Button 4, button 5, button 6, 7, 8, 9. And if we go back to our design view, yes, there they are in order. And yeah, so imagine we want to make a keypad for a calculator type of thing. First of all, we'd want to make the flow horizontal and wrap. And then we can quickly say we want a maximum number of columns that we want before it wraps. So just simply adding 3 there and making the wrap mode a chain. We have almost, okay, these are in the wrong order. Very easy to fix. We want button 10 to come after button 9. So here we go. And back to our design, and voila, a calculator type of thing. If we want to play around with the orientation, we can have something that looks like this instead. It's really, really flexible. I don't think I'll be able to demo everything. There's things like how they're spread out within the view. So for example, you can make them come together closely, and you can also add a horizontal gap that you want to put in, for example, 5 dp. And yeah, it's really, really fast to iterate and develop and see what you're doing using the constraint layout flow, which is why I have fallen in love with it, and I use it for every project that I can. So yeah, that's more or less it. Any questions?